Thank you, everyone, for joining us for tonight's online Dharma gathering. I'm Sheena Brockington-Taylor, and I will be your host for the evening. Tonight's session, Rage, Meditation, Action, Healing, will be led by Aishah Shahidah Simmons. Aishah will lead us through a guided meditation, then she'll do a Dharma talk, and at the end, we will do a question and answer session. Today's session will be recorded, so if you prefer not to be seen, please turn your camera off. Please note that you will also be recorded if you are asking a question. If you have a question during the guided instruction or during the talk, please feel free to enter it in the chat box at any time, and we'll be sure to get to it during the Q&A session. The recording of tonight's gathering can be accessed within 48 hours via your purchased products on your Vimeo weekly Dharma account. You will receive an email notification once it's posted. Aishah Shahidah Simmons is an award-winning Black feminist lesbian cultural worker who for over 25 years has examined the intersections of race, gender, sexuality, and sexual violence. She creates work that is informed by her lived experiences as a child abuse survivor, adult rape survivor, and Buddhist practitioner in the Theravada tradition, committed to disrupting and ending the inhumane humanely. Aishah is the editor of the 2019 released leading edge anthology, Love with Accountability, Digging Up the Roots of Sexual Abuse. She's producer, writer, and director of the groundbreaking 2006 released Ford Foundation funded film, No, the Rape Documentary. Centering diasporic Black survivors, Love with Accountability, and No breaks silence around sexual violence committed against children and adults, cultivates healing for survivors, and encourage accountability outside of the criminal and justice system. Aishah is on Twitter and Instagram at AfroLes. And I would like to introduce you to Aishah, who will be our speaker for tonight.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure. So thank you, Sheena, and just much gratitude for this opportunity to share on weekly Dharma gathering, and specifically to my very dear and long-term friend and Dharma sibling, Shantae. We go back to the 90s. So this is really a wonderful gift. And I was very reticent to accepting this invitation. In fact, when Shantae first invited me last fall, I was like, oh, no, I'm not a teacher, because I have studied meditation, Vipassana meditation, in the Goenka lineage for 17 years. And definitely it is integral in terms of my life, the whole meditation practice, but have never been appointed as a teacher. So I didn't feel like I could talk under a Dharma umbrella, even though I would say that Dhamma is an integral part of my life. So I will begin with the meditation and guided meditation, and then I'll do my talk. I want to share that in Vipassana meditation, the tradition in which I studied for many years, I left the tradition last September 17th. But in that tradition, we practice what's called Anapana, and then Vipassana, which is, some people refer to it as body scan. I'm only going to do Anapana because the way in which I practice it is for a full hour. So starting out with Anapana, which I will discuss, and then moving into Vipassana meditation. But for the 20 minutes that we will participate in meditation, it will just be the Anapana. So I'm going to remove my glasses, and I sit in terms of literally sitting when I meditate, but I respect and understand that some people stand, they lay down, and they do walking, or as I learned from Tori Sala this past weekend, Dharma teacher from Seattle Insight Meditation Society, says that it's not, walking can also just be stepping, being mindful of the steps. So in a position that is comfortable for you, that works for you, and please put yourself in that position. And I close my eyes when I meditate, and so that will be my instruction in terms of the meditation. Whew, just saying, sorry, the noise. So what we do is I close my eyes, and I focus on the area right below the nostrils and above the upper lip. So right in this area, and focus on my breathing. I'm not controlling the breathing. I'm just observing the breathing. And so it's just in and out, and sometimes your breathing can be heavy, it can be light, but that's just all I focus on, is right in this area, right under the nose, and just breathing. And while doing that, it's really the purpose of this meditation, in terms of the way in which I practice it, is to calm the mind down and to prepare for doing what is called Vipassana meditation, insight, and that's full observation of the bodily sensations from head to toe, toe to head, and all places in between. But again, what we're going to be just focusing on is just respiration. And while that's happening, chances are that you'll be aware of sensations in your body, discomfort. You'll be aware, thoughts will be running through or walking through or crawling through. And the purpose is to not get wrapped up in the thoughts, to allow the thoughts to come and go. So do not follow the thoughts and get wrapped up into the story. That really all that you want to do is focus on your breath without saying in, out, out, in. Just focus on the respiration, that you're not judging it, you're not controlling it, you're just observing it. And so that's what we will do for the next 20 minutes. I won't every 5 minutes or something interrupt. I will just be sitting in meditation, observing the respiration under my nose to top of my lips, upper lips, right in this area, and just focusing on the breath and not getting swept up in the thoughts, just allowing the thoughts to just keep passing, kind of just like a reel, but staying as grounded as one can and focused on the respiration. so interesting because I just said, I started out the meditation saying I wasn't going to like do intervals because I don't do intervals when I'm sitting. But one of the things that like popped into my head, and I just was like, let it go, was just really remembering how thoughts can be so overpowering, and that when that happens, what I was taught to do and what I do is then do heavier breathing, just to kind of, so that, because the thoughts at times can overpower just even your awareness of sensations below the nostril, above the upper lip, and so that is just something to, you know, to just kind of bring it back to breath. And as I said, that part of meditation is part of a longer meditation, which then leads into observing sensations in the body. It is the it is a way to really get the mind more balanced, so that then you can then do a deep dive and really begin to observe the inner framework, the inner universe known as the body. So I wanted to take notes because I wanted to be mindful of time. And I feel like if I didn't take notes, I would just go on. And I want to say that just do a content warning, because this is about, I will be talking about sexual violence and healing, and talking about rage and meditation, as avenues, meditation as an avenue for action and healing. So as I started out by saying, I am been practicing Vipassana meditation, insight meditation, also known in, taught by S.N. Goenka in the Siaji Ubakin lineage coming out of Burma for 17 years, have sat courses and served courses as well, ranging from 10 to 30 days. And I will just touch upon that in my comments, but just to say that it was a lifeline. And I left the tradition. I thought about talking about it in this talk, but that's not what I'm going to talk about today. I made the difficult and yet necessary decision for myself to leave the organization last fall, September 17th, exact date. It was an internal decision. And though the practice is still very much a part of my life. And I should say that it is precisely because of my leaving that I'm even able to participate in the weekly Dharma gathering as a teacher or leader, because if you're not appointed in the tradition in which I sat, and even if you are, just in terms of being able to give talks, it just requires a whole lot of process. So I just wanted to at least share that. I also want to say that this isn't a talk on how the Dhamma helped me overcome anger and reactivity. I am in process. So I start out with a question: how do you refrain from harming yourself and others while striving to equanimously and compassionately swim with unavoidable sharks in the ocean called life? So, rage, meditation, action, healing. The title of my sharing comes from a choreo poem, A State of Rage, that I wrote in December 1994 in a Tony K. Bombara script writing workshop at a place called Scribe Video Center in Philadelphia. For people who don't know Tony K. Bombara was an award-winning, forward-thinking Black feminist cultural worker, filmmaker, organizer, and activist. I was fortunate with the sacred gift to study with Bombara in the last 5 years of her life before colon cancer transitioned her from the physical realm to the ancestral realm in December of 1995, December 9th, 1995. Nobel laureate Toni Morrison, Bambara's dear friend and editor, called Bambara a writer's writer in the 1996 released Deep Sightings in Rescue Missions, a collection of Toni K. Bambara's writings and conversations that Toni Morrison published posthumously in 1996. At the time, I was in the embryonic stages of what was called the Rape Video Project, a documentary on the rape of Black women and girls by Black men. I expressed tremendous frustration and difficulty with Toni K. Bambara about transforming my thoughts and feelings in my head about the project to images on paper. Sensing that I may come to class empty-handed, or worse, not come to class at all, Toni followed up with a big sister, take no prisoners, answering machine message telling me that I better come to class and I better not come empty-handed. Her message was my initiation by fire, and it was grounded in love, and I'm forever grateful. Shortly after hearing Toni's voicemail message, I sat down and wrote A State of Rage. I'm not going to read the entire poem because it's long and I want to be cognizant of time. But the opening is, this is not an objective piece. I said, this is not an objective piece. I am in a state of rage. I said, I am in a state of rage about the rape and sexual abuse of women of African descent in the United States of America. The poem journeys back to the enslavement of African people in the US and moves forward to contemporary moments, which at the time of writing it was 1994. This is a perfect example of how contemporary is never static and always moving, a Nietzsche, impermanence. The closing of the poem is, this is a meditation piece, and peace is spelled P-E-A-C-E, so it is an intentional play on words. This is a meditation piece. This is a healing piece, a meditation piece, a healing piece, meditation piece, healing piece, rage, meditation, action, healing, Aishah. So in response to what I wrote and shared in class, I came to class and shared, it was a small class. At that time, it was, for that particular class workshop, we were all cisgender women. And Toni wrote very detailed notes, of which I'll just share an excerpt. She said, your piece can be useful in giving permission to be enraged and outraged. An angry woman, like a laughing woman, is often perceived as a danger to the status quo. A laughing woman might be laughing because she sees the hoax, the ridiculousness of the setup, and may next use her humor to point a finger and bring the whole thing down. An angry woman may be angry because she has peeped the scene and will now use her rage to mobilize others to topple the regime. Both kinds of women are threats and are therefore called mad, out of control, and strident. We are taught, especially women, that anger and rage are unhealthy and that we need to deny it and flee it. You clearly don't think so. Good. Apathy, despair, and amnesia would be the unhealthy responses to the film's universe, and anger the most useful. Rage is fuel. It can leave the person smoldering, it can consume the angry one, or it can locomote the feeling toward foolishness or usefulness. It can be a tool with which to process the power of the unconscious. Close quote. I'm just using that excerpt. So A State of Rage served as my literal and figurative roadmap for what became my 2006 released film, feature-length film, No, the Rape Documentary, which is about rape, accountability, and healing in Black communities. Now that's been the official story all of which is true, but it's not the full story, full A State of Rage story. Like many of us, I came to Buddhist practice because I was suffering. I was already 10 years deep with working with an incredible Black feminist licensed psychologist, Dr. Clara Whaley Perkins, and I'm still working with her to this day, 27 years later. I was also in search of additional tools to help me navigate. I found solace and rigor through meditation. It is, wait, I'm sorry. I feel like I skipped something. Well, let's keep going. No, I did skip something. I'm sorry. Let me just go back. I'm a child sexual abuse and rape survivor, and I've been in states of intense rage about my rape during my sophomore year in college, and silent, often unnamed rage about my child sexual abuse. This rage has permeated beyond the sexual violence that I endured. Simultaneously, however, I'm firm in my belief that my conscious anger and rage in this lifetime originates from the sexual trauma I experienced when I was a child. A very long story short, I was molested by my pop-pop, who was my paternal step-grandfather, from the ages of 10 to 12. This was in the years 1979 to 81. And shortly after the abuse began, I told my parents, and they didn't disrupt or end my child sexual abuse. I was inadvertently and also directly encouraged by my parents to celebrate and love my sexual harm doer. I was left to cope with the trauma and learn how to navigate my way with both fearing and also deeply loving a man who was my doting pop-pop and my sexual terrorist. This included saving his life in 2010. Like all of us, Pop-Pop was filled with contradictions, and so were my parents. He was a hardworking race man, union man, and family man who was most devoted to his wife, my grandmother. This included him taking care of her almost single-handedly for 10 years while she lived with Alzheimer's disease. He was the hero, and in so many ways, I was encouraged and taught by my parents to solely focus on all of the good and not the harmful. It was a recipe for intense mental, emotional, and psychological harm, not to mention unspeakable rage. While my story is unique in that its specific journey in this lifetime, enduring and surviving sexual trauma is not. We're in the midst of an epidemic, and so many of us have been directly and indirectly impacted by the ravages of child and adult sexual trauma. So I wrote A State of Rage almost exactly 8 years to the day before I sat my first 10-day Vipassana meditation course taught by S.N. Goenka through one of his senior assistant teachers in December 2002. So in addition to my film, Know the Rape documentary, the choreo poem, A State of Rage, was the unknown at the time precursor and roadmap to my becoming a student and practitioner of the Buddha. And so, as I said before, like many of us, I came to Buddhist practice because I was suffering. I was already 10 years in with working with my therapist, psychologist, and still with her 27 years later. And I was also in search of other tools to help me navigate. I found solace and rigor through meditation. It was an anchor in the storms. And when I do not allow reactivity to consume me, it is a compass around so much, but especially rage. I learned the technique of sitting and observing all of my thoughts and emotions, which manifest in the form of pleasant and unpleasant sensations throughout the body. We often focus on all the negative, right? Like, I'm enraged, I'm angry, I'm sad. We don't also talk about the joy, meaning that they're all emotions, they're all sensations, they're all moving, it's all impermanent. But today I want to talk about rage. So for me, the bodily sensations that I experience in rage, when I'm enraged, is heat, almost unbearable heat in my body, and fire, pit in my stomach, dry mouth, and also chills. So when I allow myself to not be overcome by rage, I'm aware, I can become aware of it in my body almost before I can even articulate it. And if I allow it, it can consume me 100%, and I can just be in complete reactivity mode. And while at times my rage has been justifiable, I've also caused harm to myself and others. I fully believe it's important to observe within externally without reacting externally until our minds have calmed down and are balanced some. So let me be clear. Meditation is a radical call to action. When I say rage, meditation, action, and it's right action. And it begins with us because at the absolute end of the day, the only people we are guaranteed in changing is ourselves. This, in my mind's eye, doesn't mean passivity in response to injustice. It means, for me, creating space to develop razor sharp clarity about how to act humanely and compassionately, first with ourselves and then with others. It means each moment to moment to moment to moment and so on. I have an opportunity, we all have an opportunity to not give our innate power away as a result of familial trauma or other vicious forms of oppression, white supremacy, patriarchy, heterosexism, ableism, socioeconomic challenges, classism, that we don't have to give our power away. For example, as a person using myself who embodies multiple identities, and I'll only just use a few: Black, woman, lesbian, who's also an incest and rape survivor, which are marginalized and oppressed in the US and also globally. I am empowered knowing that I have an opportunity to not give my innate power away as a result of vicious and atrocious forms of oppression. In these very moments to moments to moments, each one of us can experience true liberation from within. This experiential understanding shouldn't ever be misunderstood or misconstrued as excusing or condoning oppression at all. I want to be clear, like, I'm not saying like, oh, just breathe and observe and calm your mind and don't let these external forces impact you, because they do impact us. There's the apparent level. I am impacted. We are impacted by so many things at the apparent level. And then there's also the ultimate level. So for me, I believe that meditation is an opportunity for us to walk with that duality, but not to ignore the apparent reality. It is an opportunity to get clarity about what's going on and then to figure out how to act. So applying equanimity, which if people do not know what that term means, it's mental calmness, it's evenness of temper in difficult situations that, so, and meditation can help with that. And metta, which is infinite loving kindness and compassion, to anti-oppression work, especially as a survivor of both child sexual abuse and adult rape, are tools to circumvent destroying oneself in the process and perhaps becoming the exact systems or entities that we are working to eradicate. This isn't easy. It is trial and error. And for me, with tiny glimpses of incremental progress along the way. It doesn't mean pretending that you're not angry. To be clear, I still get overcome with rage and despair. I'm a very reactive person. What this practice continuously teaches me is how to work with it. And so I want to do a very abbreviated story about my contemporary work, which is called Love with Accountability. And I have an anthology titled Love with Accountability, Digging Up the Roots of Child Sexual Abuse, which is about 40 survivors, diasporic Black child sexual abuse survivors and advocates, writing about how we can address, how we can disrupt and end child sexual abuse without relying on the criminal justice system that has routinely harmed marginalized communities, Black communities, and other marginalized communities. But I would offer that when it comes to handling sexual violence, specifically child sexual abuse, I think that there's been a lot of harm caused by the state. But 5 years ago, so I shared that I was molested in '79. So what, many, many years ago, and loved and my grandfather and feared him. But then when I became an adult, somehow, somewhere, put all of that. I mean, it was walking with it, but it wasn't focal. But in 2010, he became very ill. I was pivotal in being a first responder to that, and saving his life and making sure that he that he was stabilized until his children, my father and my aunt, were able to get there, because they both lived. They don't live in the city. And then it was then in 2010 that I was just like, no more. I'm done. I'm done. So I never saw him again, and he became an ancestor in February 2011. Fast forward to 2015 was when I realized my parents' bystanding role to the abuse that I experienced. And my parents are incredible human rights activists, international human rights activists, who they're divorced. They met in the civil rights movement and put their lives on the line in multiple ways, for racial justice, for gender justice in this country and globally. So just the contradictions are just glaring, which is what I would offer. All of us are filled with contradictions. It's really about, what do we do when we are faced with the contradictions? So I started demanding love with accountability. I started signing my communiques to both my parents, love with accountability. I was essentially saying that my love would not shield them from holding them accountable for their bystander roles to my abuse, because they didn't remove me from the situation, they didn't disrupt it. And then I engaged with my grandfather forever till 2010, from '79 to 2010. And I cannot even begin to share how powerful my sitting practice was during that time, because initially my parents they were not dealing. And I was so, enraged I feel like it's an understatement. And enraged, particularly with them, because of who they are in the world. And I really just felt like I was going to lose it, like literally lose it. And I just kept, definitely in therapy, definitely cultivated community of survivors and activists and friends who were there for me, but also relied on the cushion and the meditation cushion, so a metaphorical cushion. And I relied on the cushion, again, not to mute, or I don't like that word, mute, to silence the rage, but to put it somewhere, to sit with it, to observe it, to be with it, because I could not force my parents to deal with it. I could not force them. I kept trying, and so it wasn't like I stopped, but it became a refuge. My cushion became a literal refuge in the fire. Like if I could draw, and I don't draw, it would be like me sitting in the fire. Like I had to kind of walking in the fire and just kind of sit. And so that was critical. And I began to kind of try to detach from wanting them to get it. And I say try because it wasn't overnight. And I think that's this other thing that, for me, I just shared this whole long journey of years. It wasn't overnight. Now in 2016, my mother did come. She faced it. She faced what I can imagine as a non-parent, but she is one. She faced the unfaceable and began taking steps to be accountable to me privately, but then also publicly. So she wrote about it in the anthology. She has talked about it publicly and continues to talk about it. And one of the things that I realized this morning, thinking about this talk, been thinking about it for a while, was that I often, particularly when I talk about the anthology, I that I ride off into the sunset with that, right? So it becomes like, oh, my mom got it, and and we can't undo 37 years of her never addressing it, but we're on the road, right? And we're doing a lot. I mean, it's hard work. I mean, because I still have anger, residuals come up, and I have to be mindful not to look at every single action through the lens of so much stuff that has happened in the past, to be in the present moment, right? So there's been this way that I've realized that I have just like ride off into the sunset, and we talk about it, or I write about it in interviews or discussions or articles. But what I haven't talked about until right now in a public space, privately, is that my father has not. He is not. We've not had our full accountability moment. And I realized this morning when I was thinking about this talk, I was like, oh my, I have to talk about that, because it's easy to sit here and say, oh, I detached, and I meditated, and I went through this horrible period. I detached, and just when I let go, my mother got it, and we rode off into the sunset. And we didn't ride off into the sunset, but she did do something that I never thought I would see in my lifetime. But my dad hasn't gotten it. So I'm still right now, February 5th, 2020, sitting in the fire. Because I was so close to my father. And he was so instrumental in so many ways in my life. Help coming out. I mean, there's just coming out as lesbian, and he works in Europe and has just done so much incredible work, and has around violence, gender violence, trafficking, just so much, and still does. And this is the Achilles heel I would offer. And I'm only speaking, everybody has a story. So I'm only speaking about my story, but I bring it up because I want to say that I am still in that fire. I'm still aware of the rage that I have, that we haven't had what I want to happen. It hasn't happened, and it may not happen. I'm 51, my parents are in their 70s. It may not happen. And so then the question becomes, how does one heal? What is the action? What is that rage, meditation, action, healing? And what has come up and comes up over and over again is detachment to the outcome. And I'm speaking experientially, but I'm also speaking theoretically, because I get glimpses of it, but it is not I'm not there continuously. And it's going to take a lot of work. But what I do know is that when I'm able to really hone in on the reality as it is, not as I want it to be, that I'm clear that detachment is part of my liberation. It doesn't mean that I don't continue to hope. It doesn't mean that if opportunities present itself, that I may not continue to try to engage in conversation around the specific topic with my father. It doesn't mean that at all. But what it does mean is that detaching from the outcome, that if he doesn't do it, if it doesn't happen, that I don't allow it to completely derail me. And that for me is the work. And it's not only the work around, I mean, I'm using child sexual abuse as an example, but I see it in other facets of life. I see it in relationships and friendships. And again, as I said, as a very reactive person, that I just can go there in a minute. And I mean, I firmly believe that a lot of that, the reason why it is for me is connected to the trauma. But then it's like, how do I move through the trauma and be able to talk about the anger and talk about the rage? So it's not about denying it. It's not about pretending. And it's also not, it's about, for me, not allowing it to control my life. And I think that what I often hear is kind of like you know, rage and meditation are, you know, don't go hand in hand. Or that meditation is about just squashing the rage. Like, you know, don't be angry, just be peaceful. And yeah, that is, I fully believe that hopefully we can all get there. But I think that what is critical is that we're not dishonest. I think there's nothing worse than pretending to not be rageful when we are. And there are many reasons to be angry. But then and what do we do with that rage? How can we channel it so that it doesn't destroy us in the process? For me, I wanted to, there's a quote that I think about, and particularly in the context of, I'm talking about sexual violence and child sexual abuse. And I needed to say that it is really powerful for this opportunity to talk about these issues in Black History Month as a Black person. So often, we don't have these types of conversations during Black History Month, that these types of conversations around sexual violence are relegated to April, Sexual Assault Awareness Month, or maybe March during Women's History Month, or perhaps October during Domestic Violence Awareness Month. But the reality is, anyone who's been impacted directly or indirectly, is that sexual violence happens all the time, and it happens to all genders, it ages, and, you know, we have to talk about it all the time. And I think that because of the impact of white supremacy on the lives of Black people, we don't feel like we can talk about these issues in public forums because of a need to protect the race. But I think that in order for all of us to get free and to be well, we have to break these silences and talk about it, and talk about complexities and contradictions. But there is a quote that I heard many years ago by a Dharma teacher, Gina Sharp, in Insight Meditation. She founder of the New York Insight Meditation Center. And it really stayed with me, particularly because in conversations around rage, around sexual violence, the next step is forgive, you gotta forgive. And I definitely believe forgiveness has to come from within. And I am always mindful of how forgiveness often comes from people. So for instance, we as Black people are often told to forgive around white supremacy. Survivors are told to forgive around sexual violence. Queer people are told to forgive around, you know, queer antagonism, heterosexism, transphobia. These are realities. And so I heard Dharma talk, I think it was like in 2010, 2011 by Gina Sharp, and around forgiveness. And it's something that really resonated with me, and I want to share it as part of closing comments, just to open up for questions, is that forgiveness doesn't mean you embrace everything about the harm doers or deny the harm that they've done and maybe are still capable of doing. By forgiving, we don't become a doormat or open ourselves up to abuse again. The practice of forgiveness is about what we do in our hearts. What leads from the act of forgiving is entirely up to us. With forgiveness, we're not leaving our discernment, our intelligence, or our wish for safety at the door. You can certainly forgive someone from afar. However, you do not have to take them back into your lives. And that's Gina Sharp. And I want to end with that. That we, you know, that again, forgiveness comes from within, and that's your process and journey. But that it doesn't mean that they have to be in your lives, that there has to be anything. It can be a process. And that is for me the work that I'm working on, that I've been working on with my pop and been able to actively work on it, engage with my mother, and then from afar with my father. And so I'm still on the journey, but for me, rage, meditation, action, healing, that's my compass. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was so beautiful. Really appreciate that talk so much. Um, let's go ahead and open the discussion. If anybody has any questions or any feedback, you can go ahead and unmute yourself, or I can unmute you. Or if you want to type something in the chat box, that's also a great way to ask your question or just share.
I feel like I should ask something. I'm here. I'm here. And,
Thank you.
that was really powerful. And thank you so much for sharing so much about your journey and how it's unfolding and the whole intersection between that rage and the practice. And actually, I was wondering about forgiveness and all of that and how that was working for you. And to hear that it's like a ongoing living process is really a powerful thing, because it's not so simple to just be like, oh, even if I don't condone what you did, you know what I mean? It's like, it seems like a very, I was wondering, and this is like, I was just curious, in your healing talks with your mom and is there been any discussion of your dad, or is that just like, oh, they're divorced? That's right, I forgot, they're divorced.
They're divorced. Yeah. No, I mean, she knows, but I mean, I'm just kind of working very much in terms of my yeah, if they were married, I think it'd be a different thing. I would like to think it'd be a different thing. And I want to say that my practice has helped me to try to look at this from all angles. And again, I'm not a parent, so I want to believe that it's got to be so painful to face that I did not protect my child. Right? Like it's just, I can't even imagine, right? Because I know harm that I've caused, and I've talked about this in other contexts. I've caused harm to my brother, who's exactly 9 years younger than me, which means he was 1 when my molestation started. And I've been in my own accountability process with him over in the past. And one of the things that I recognize, and he's my brother, not my child. I had so much initial shame and guilt and remorse. I didn't even want to I didn't want to act. I didn't want to own it. I didn't want to do any of it. So I can't even imagine, particularly with people who do this work. It's not, that this is their work. They're human rights defenders and they have incredible track records. What does that mean? That's not to excuse or condone, but it's just for me that I work on empathy. Now, let me say, I get into periods of rage, and there are examples like this time last year, I was on a rage rampage with him. But then it's just like, to what end? For my own sanity. And like I can't force him or anybody. But I can, continue to do the work in the world. I know that he loves me. I think that there's just a lot of, I don't want to project things on him. I think for me, I just see the complexities.
Yeah. So I wonder with men, they just like, I don't know, things they won't talk about or don't seem culturally have been told in so many ways, and many aspects of culture not to talk about. I don't know, maybe it's different.
No, I agree.
Not and to like hone in on him per se, but just
yeah, no, I think that there is a lot around masculinity, and it's complex, because when I stepped away and was like, I don't want to do this anymore, in terms of my grandfather, when he was ill, he was like, he had my back. He was like, absolutely, I got this. He shared with other family members why I stepped away, because I went from like Florence Nightingale to now, this was in 2010. Yeah. So it's not like all like, he hasn't done anything. That's not true. It's just as my layers of understanding around accountability have deepened, I wanted him to go there with me, and he won't.
Yeah. That love with accountability.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that.
Me too.
Yeah. So
My father died in 96, and that there were some things I kind of very obliquely brought up because we knew he was dying of cancer. So I had these opportunities to bring up some stuff to him obliquely. And now in retrospect, I was like, why didn't I ask him more directly? But there must have been a reason, I guess, at the time. I didn't have a practice then. Maybe that's why. I don't know. But anyway, I don't know. It is complicated, isn't it? It's like especially for people who have to deal with things around their kids and the harm that they've experienced under their watch, unintentionally or. But I'm also.
I don't know. I wonder if you weren't ready to, like let me say, I started working on rape and sexual violence in 1994. I made a film. Both my parents are in the film around sexual violence and healing accountability. My mother is a survivor. My father, again, as I said, does this human rights work around gender violence. I don't address child sexual abuse in the film, no, at any in-depth level. And the film came out in 2006, and it wasn't until 2015 that I honed in on them, right? And so I shared that as just kind of a salve, if you will, around I don't, maybe you weren't ready, you know what I'm saying? And I was like, because that's what I go, how the heck did I not see this before? Like, what the hell? I didn't see it. And I don't think of course I saw on some level, but I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready until 2015. I didn't have it to I guess, because at the time that I went in, I had to cut off. There was a what do you call it? Severance, if you will. It was like it was ruptured. I drew a line in the sand. Talk about rage. So, and I think it took 2015 when I was 46, when I was just like, okay, right this moment, they're alive, but it was like the death before death. It was like, I have no parents. So, and I don't think when I look at it that way, I go, oh, there's no way I could have done it sooner. I didn't have it in me to do it.
Thank you for sharing that part. I want to see your film. I noticed that it's on Vimeo by demand, I think.
Yes, it's on Vimeo on demand. Know the Rape documentary. It is.
I'll watch that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Your poem was so powerful too. It's really amazing.
Oh, thank you. It's the poem is, if you do a state of rage plus Google search plus the Feminist Wire, it's on thefeministwire.com. But if you just do a state of rage plus the Feminist Wire, it should come up right in your Google search, so you can read the entire poem.
Can I ask, do we need to wrap up, Sheena?
If you have one more question, and if Aishah can stay to answer, we're good.
Yes, I can.
Just one. I just wonder, because mentioning it's on Feminist Rage. I was just curious. Do you identify as a feminist?
I do. I identify as a Black feminist. I definitely do. Yeah. Many titles: Black, feminist, lesbian, survivor, Buddhist. Yeah. Yeah. In fact, I would say it's feminism that has, I feel like it's all these multi-layers. It's therapy, it's feminism, it's Buddhism, that it's all multi-layered, the whole process journey of working towards the slow journey, towards realization, but towards healing and accountability. Yeah, it's been the feminist movement, I would say, the second wave feminist movement and anti-sexual violence movement, led by Black and women of color and white women, multiracial, that have really informed and raised my awareness around so much. And the whole the Black women's self-help movement coming out of the Black Women's Health Project. And so it's been modalities.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anne, for your question. And I have one question.
Sure.
Just wanted to see if you could talk a little bit about therapy. What actually made you say, okay, I definitely need to find a therapist and I'm ready to take the step to talk to someone. But also, just hearing that you've had your same therapist for so many years and you've been so consistent with therapy, if you could just talk about that for a minute, because I think that's really important, especially for Black women, to just kind of hear about that.
Yeah, well, I have to say it was Black women who were big sister friends, Teresa Lewis King and Sandy Smith, who really, when I was, so I started therapy in 92, so I was 23. I was just struggling with so much, but I couldn't even touch child sexual abuse in therapy at that point. And they recommended a Black woman, Black feminist, licensed clinical psychologist who specializes in sexual trauma. And so I started seeing her in 1992, 2 years before I started working on No, 10 years before I sat my first meditation course. And she's been a lifeline, and I was very fortunate because there were many, many, many times when I had no money in my checking account, none. Because all of it, whatever I had was going towards making this film, where she did not allow the balance of my checking account to determine if I would receive her services. And I stayed with her because I recognized that the trauma that I endured, I wasn't well, I wasn't well. And I thought it was important to do the work that I needed to get well. Toni K. Bombara has this line in her book, The Salt Eaters, "Are you sure you want to be well?" Because there's a whole lot of weight when you're well, and it is a lot of weight. And I travel a lot, but I'm grounded, or have been grounded for a very long time in all my life in Philadelphia. And so I was fortunate to see her. Now, thank goodness, technology is such that if I relocate or move or anything like that, I can still continue with her if I want to, if we continue via Zoom. But I think it's really important that to just emphasize, for me, 10 years of therapy before meditation, before any kind of structured meditation. That was my journey. And I'm so glad, because the levels of trauma that I was having, and particularly in the tradition, which I studied for 17 years, it is rigorous, it is austere. I love it, but it is hardcore in a very powerful way. That I'm glad that I had therapy, right? To do some of that unpacking. I don't think meditation is a substitution for therapy, and I don't think therapy is a substitution for meditation. I recognize that in many, that therapy can be expensive. Fortunately, there are rape crisis centers and where they do offer peer counseling and therapy on sliding scales. There are different, lists, if you will, therapists who work and do sliding scale if you don't have insurance that will cover it. But I cannot sing its praises enough around therapy, because I think sometimes people think, oh, I don't need it. I meditate, or I pray, I go to church, or and all that's good. But I do think that there's something important to look at what's happening in the mind as well as the body, that all of it is interconnected. And some things are probably going to come to the surface when you are doing deep, intense meditative work. And you want to be able to work with someone who understands, who understands sexual trauma, who can help you with that.
Thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
So any more questions before we wrap up for the night? Okay, well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for tonight's gathering. Please join us next week on Wednesday, February 12th, where we'll have Sebene Solis for a talk titled "The Erotic as Power, Exploring the Feminine in Our Spiritual Practice." And I will post a link in the chat if anyone is interested. And while you're here, I just want to remind everyone that you can become a subscriber to Weekly Dharma Gathering if you're not already. And right now we have a 7-day trial running. So go ahead and sign up, and then you can see that next talk. In addition, if you are on social media, please make sure to follow us on Instagram at Weekly Dharma, and we're on Facebook at Weekly Dharma Gathering. And I think that Aishah wants to show us her book and also give
Oh,
us
there it
the
is.
title.
Could you hold it up closer? Thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh, yeah,
Love Testimony, Digging Up the Roots of Child Sexual Abuse. It's available from AK Press, which is its publisher, and it support independent press, but it's also on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and available in print and Kindle Kindle or e-reader format.
Cool.
So, yeah.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you.